Violence in the movies, cinematic craft, or Hollywood gone too far? Point. Hollywood, stop exposing our kids to violence. Violence in Hollywood movies has become excessive and is putting our youth and our entire society at risk for violent behaviors. In the golden age of Hollywood, filmmakers relied on solid storytelling techniques to entertain audiences. Unfortunately, today's film industry often draws audiences to movie theaters with promotional promises of action-packed violence, brutal murders, and mass destruction. Violence in movies is on the rise. Researchers at the Annenberg Public Policy Center, APPC, of the University of Pennsylvania found that the amount of gun violence shown in PG-13 films has more than tripled since 1985. Children are being exposed to high levels of violence in movies, television, and other media throughout the span of childhood. According to research published by the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the typical American child will view more than 200,000 acts of violence, including more than 16,000 murders before age 18. Researchers have found tremendous evidence that links exposure to violence in media and violent behavior in children. In 2000, researchers from 6 leading medical organizations, including the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association, identified a connection. They reviewed hundreds of scholarly studies on media violence and its influence on aggressive behavior in children. They reported their conclusions to Congress, stating that viewing entertainment violence can lead to increases in aggressive attitudes, values, and behavior, particularly in children. Another 2005 review of such studies, published by The Lancet and reported by the New York Times, concurred. It found that exposure to media violence leads to aggression, desensitization toward violence, and lack of sympathy for victims of violence, particularly in children. How can anyone deny the existence of a link between media violence and violent behavior in children when it is being proven and supported by our country's top researchers? The evidence is overwhelming, stated Jeffrey McIntyre of the American Psychological Association. To argue against it is like arguing against gravity. What Hollywood filmmakers must understand is that children mimic what they see in movies. When a hero exhibits violent behaviors to defeat an enemy, children follow his lead. They learn that violence is an acceptable form of problem solving. Those who see themselves as victims may be more likely to act out in violent behaviors. They may act against peers, parents, teachers, or other authority figures. According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, in 2011, students ages 12 to 18 were victims of 597,500 violent victimizations at school. Violence in the media has been increasing and reaching proportions that are dangerous. Emmanuel Tenay, MD, reported to Psychiatric Times. The former Wayne State University professor and forensic psychiatrist argues what we call entertainment is really propaganda for violence. If you manufacture guns, you don't need to advertise, because it is done by our entertainment industry. Do we really want to teach our children that guns and violence are the answers to our problems? Some people do not believe that exposure to violence in movies is a risk factor for violent behavior. This is because they themselves have not been affected by the exposure. However, no one would reasonably argue, I've always ridden my bicycle without a helmet and I have never incurred a head injury, therefore there is no link between not wearing a bicycle helmet and increasing your risk of getting a head injury. Why apply such flawed reasoning when it comes to violence in Hollywood movies? Others suggest that it is up to parents to protect their children from violence in films. They urge parents to follow the rating guidelines set by the Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA. However, APPC researchers report that PG-13 movies portray the same amount of violence as R-rated movies. Parents can no longer rely on MPAA's film ratings to help determine which movies are suitable for children. Of course, media violence is not the only risk factor for violent behavior in children. Still, it is certainly a large threat. Screenwriters and movie makers do not need to resort to depictions of sensational violence. There's no need to put children and the society at large at risk in order to entertain audiences. Good storytelling creates suspense. It keeps an audience engaged with the suggestion